The hall had been built in 1907 for reasons that had long outlasted the government that commissioned it, and the room still carried those reasons in its timber ceiling, and its stone-cut window frames, and its particular conviction that the right space could shape the people who moved through it. Outside, the November canal was locked under the first real ice of the season, and the lights along the Rideau bridges made long, pale columns in the dark. Inside, 200 people from Ridgemont Infrastructure and its associated firms moved through the room's warm circuits, doing what people at these evenings always did, finding the geometry that kept them safe. Brendan Croft stood near the far end of the reception area, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, doing what he had always done at these dinners, which was to watch. He was 54. He had been with Ridgemont for 18 years and had risen to the title of principal structural engineer through the same method he applied to everything else in his professional life: consistent, meticulous work, done without announcement and without error. His colleagues respected him in the particular way people respect someone whose contribution they rely on without fully registering. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck and wore the same charcoal wool blazer to most occasions that required one, and had never given much thought to whether this made him easy to overlook at gatherings, because being overlooked at gatherings had never struck him as a problem worth solving. Janet had handled the social warmth. She had stood at his side at 11 of these recognition dinners and made conversations flow and remembered the details of people's lives that mattered to them. The daughter starting university, the renovation that had run over budget, the knee surgery someone's husband had been putting off. The rooms had opened for her in the easy way rooms open for people who know how to enter them. She had died of a thoracic cancer 37 months ago, in February, on the coldest night of that winter, and since then Brendan had come to these evenings alone and done exactly what he was doing now, which was to stand near the perimeter, hold a glass, and watch. He was watching the entrance when Simone arrived. She came through the main doors at 7:05 in a dark burgundy coat, still buttoned against the cold, her dark hair pinned up without elaboration. She stopped at the threshold in the way a person does when they are taking a full reading of a room before they commit to entering it. A quick, comprehensive sweep, the kind she brought to project reviews. And in that brief pause, Brendan saw the moment she registered what the room had arranged for her. Nobody was waiting. Nobody had held a space. The clusters of conversation had formed without her in them, and the room wore this fact lightly, the way rooms wear things they have decided not to be accountable for. He had worked with Simone twice over the past 3 years, and knew her from those cycles as thorough and unhurried in her precision. The kind of project coordinator who caught problems before they compounded and documented them without drama. He knew, in the peripheral way office information travels, that her divorce from Stuart Vance had been finalized the previous June. Stuart was a founding partner of Ridgemont. He was on the other side of the room right now, 20 feet away, at the center of a cluster that included 3 of the firm's senior directors and a woman Brendan didn't recognize who stood at his side with the easy proprietary air of someone who has recently decided where she belongs. Simone made her way toward the bar, and Brendan watched the room perform its specific choreography. Rachel Thorne from Simone's own project team turned mid-sentence in the other direction. A senior project director named Preston Gale found a reason to examine something behind him. 2 junior staff members near the canapé table clocked her arrival with a glance that lasted less than a second, exchanged something between them, and shifted their bodies a quarter turn away. A woman from the finance group, who 3 months ago would have crossed the room to say hello, suddenly found herself absorbed in a conversation she hadn't started. Nothing was said. Nothing was done. It was the kind of exclusion that cannot be pointed to, that each person performing it would deny without lying, because each individual act was small enough to be invisible, and all of them together composed something that was not small at all. This was how it was done in rooms like this one, with brevity, with perfect deniability, with the pleasant Canadian assumption that politeness requires only the absence of direct cruelty and nothing more. Simone ordered a sparkling water. She said something to the bartender that made him smile. Then she took her glass and moved to stand alone at the far edge of the reception area, her back near the stone wall, and she watched the evening arrange itself without her, with the composure of someone who has assembled that composure quickly and intends to maintain it regardless of the cost. Brendan had known what it felt like to be the cold thing in the warm room. After Janet died, he had come to functions like this for the better part of a year and felt the careful, well-intentioned distance of people who did not know what to say and had chosen silence as the path of least harm. He had understood that they meant well. He had also understood that meaning well, from the inside of it, felt nearly identical to not caring. He watched Simone hold her position. He watched her eyes move across the room without settling, the specific, careful pattern of someone measuring how much longer they can stay before staying becomes a thing they will not recover from. He thought about his evening. He had planned to speak to 4 people, eat the dinner, and leave before the speeches ran past 9. He had planned nothing that would ask anything of him. He looked at the room. He looked at what the room was doing to her. He set his glass on the bar. He picked up 2 fresh glasses from the tray a server was circling with, and he walked across the reception area at the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who has already made his decision and is simply fulfilling it. He passed Rachel Thorne, who glanced up with mild curiosity. He passed the outer edge of Stewart's cluster without breaking stride. He reached the far wall. Simone hadn't seen him coming. When she became aware of someone beside her, she straightened with that reflexive preparation, the brace for polite deflection, and then she saw who it was, and her expression did something complicated that she almost managed to contain. Brendan offered one of the glasses without ceremony. "Sparkling," he said, "same as yours." She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. "Brendan Croft," she said. Her voice was measured and even, structural. 18 years. Though most nights like this one, I'm not entirely sure they counted. He said it without performance, in the same level register he used for load calculations and project updates, and he watched her gauge it. The careful reading for condescension underneath the gesture, for practiced warmth that was actually pity in a better suit. He let her look as long as she needed. Whatever she found, she did not move away. "Simone Leroux," she said, though she knew he knew. "Project coordination." "I know. You caught a bearing load discrepancy on the Carlton extension 2 years ago. Would have cost us 6 weeks in a structural review. Nobody thanked you for it." She turned to look at him properly. "I didn't know anyone had noticed." "I noticed structural things," he said, and left it at that. Around them, the room had already registered the shift. He could hear it in the minor adjustment of conversations nearby. Not stopping, but changing register, the way a room changes when something enters its social field that it hasn't accounted for. He felt the attention on his back. He had expected it when he picked up the second glass. Simone had felt it too. "Half the room is running a calculation right now," she said, keeping her voice low. "Yes. The answer they'll arrive at will involve my ex-husband and your standing at this firm." "Probably," Brendan said. He looked out the long window at the canal below, at the ice and the cold light on it. "I thought about that before I walked over." She was quiet, and I walked over anyway. She studied his profile in the way she'd studied the glass, assessing it for what was underneath. He looked back at the window and gave her the time. "Why?" she asked. Before he could answer, Preston appeared at his shoulder with the rehearsed informality of a man delivering a message he'd been asked to make sound spontaneous. "Brendan." A handshake, a smile that did not reach its natural conclusion. "Stewart wanted to loop you in on the Dunbar timeline before we sit down. He mentioned you've had some reservations about the load sequencing." Brendan turned to look at him with the same unhurried patience he brought to bearing calculations. "Tell Stewart I'll find him after dinner. It can keep," he suggested. "After dinner," Brendan said, pleasantly and without negotiation. Preston withdrew. In the silence after, Simone set her glass on the stone window ledge. Her voice, when she spoke, had closed back into the register she'd walked in with. "I should find my seat. This is becoming something that follows you, and I'm not willing to be the reason it does." She moved away from him, not toward the table plan but toward the vestibule, the coat check, the outer doors. The recalculated decision written plainly in the direction she chose. Brendan watched her for a moment. Then he followed. The corridor between the main hall and the street entrance was long and narrow, paneled in restoration oak, its sconces dimmed for the evening. The muffled sound of the reception behind them gave the space the particular quality of something happening at a remove. Simone had stopped near the window at the far end, one hand against the frame. She heard him before she turned. When she did, her expression was already arranged for someone she was going to send away. 1 minute, he said. After that, if you want to go, I'll get your coat. She held herself the same way she'd held herself all evening, upright, contained, assembled. But something underneath had shifted. Something was closer to the surface. She spoke before he could. I was Stuart's wife for 9 years, she said. Her voice was flat and precise, the voice of someone reporting facts they have arranged carefully so the emotion in them doesn't spill. I went to every one of these dinners. I knew every senior partner's spouse by name. I knew which conversations to start and which to finish, and how to make a room feel warmer without anyone being able to identify how I'd done it. She paused. I was quite good at it. He didn't fill the pause, he just waited. Then the marriage ended and the room stayed exactly the same. She turned her gaze to the window. Same people, same dinner, same hall. Just suddenly I'm not anyone's wife anymore, and I'm not a partner, and I'm not even a liability that needs to be actively managed. I'm just something that used to have a position in the room and doesn't have one anymore. A long breath. I didn't expect it to be this precise. The not seeing. It's very carefully done. The corridor held the quiet between them. So when you walked across the floor tonight, she continued, my first thought wasn't that you were kind. It was that you hadn't understood what you were walking into. That by Monday you'd have a very specific understanding of what it costs to be seen standing near someone like me. Brendan listened all the way through. He did not look at his watch. He did not let his face arrange itself into anything that would have made her feel observed rather than heard. When she finished, he gave her words a full breath of space before he answered. I want to tell you something, he said, and I'd like you to take it the way I mean it, not the way a room like that one would translate it. She gave a small nod. When Janet died, I spent the better part of a year going to events like this one and feeling the room decide I was a variable it didn't know how to place. Not because anyone disliked me, not because I'd done anything wrong, just because grief makes people uncertain, and uncertainty makes people find other arrangements. He turned his water glass slowly in his hand. People who had included me by reflex for years started finding reasons not to. No one was unkind. They just stopped seeing me in the way that registered. I became someone they had to think about before approaching, and thinking about it meant not approaching. Simone was watching him without moving. About 14 months in, he said, a colleague I barely knew, woman from the environmental team, came and stood beside me at the reception bar at one of these dinners and talked to me for 20 minutes about the Rideau Watershed Restoration Project. She didn't mention Janet. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She just stood beside me and talked to me like I was a person in the room rather than a situation the room was managing. He paused. That was the most useful thing anyone did for me in that whole year, by a considerable margin. The corridor was quiet. Behind them, the hall moved through its rhythms. So it wasn't heroic, he said. When I picked up that second glass, it was just what someone did for me once, when it mattered, and I could see this was the moment to return it. Simone didn't answer right away. She looked at the window, at the dark beyond it, at the city moving through its cold, ordinary business below. Her arms, which had been folded across her chest, dropped slowly. You are a very unusual person, she said at last. My assistant has mentioned that. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something adjacent and real. Then it settled into something quieter, the first thing all evening that wasn't armor. One dinner, she said, I'll come back for dinner. They walked back into the hall together at a pace that was neither hurried nor performed, simply two people who had been somewhere and were returning. The room registered it. Brendan felt the attention land and reconfigure the way attention reconfigures when something it has already categorized refuses to stay in its category. Rachel Thorne watched them cross the floor with an expression that had moved past judgment into something more complicated, the expression of someone quietly revising an assumption they'd made quickly and now weren't sure of. Preston Gale, stationed near the bar, set his glass down with the deliberate care of a man who has just decided not to take a next step he'd been considering. 2 junior staff members watched them pass, and the glance they exchanged this time seemed to have very little to do with Simone or Brendan specifically, and more to do with something one of them was privately reconsidering about themselves. Stuart Vance watched from the center of his cluster. He said nothing. After a moment, he turned back to the woman beside him and resumed his conversation, and it was a small gesture, the decision not to act, but in a room organized around what he wanted, it was not small at all. They found their seats. The dinner moved through its courses. Brendan did not perform warmth or fill the space with cheerful industry. He was simply present in the way he was always present, attentive without being busy about it, listening more than speaking, asking the occasional question that was genuine rather than polite. Simone, once she stopped monitoring the room for threats, was someone else entirely, the dry precision he'd seen in her project documentation, an economy of language that matched his own, a small and careful laugh she used sparingly and meant completely when she did. By the time the speeches began, the table had settled into the easy inattention of a room that has normalized something it once thought worth watching. The 2 colleagues to their left had long since stopped registering that anything unusual was happening. The evening had become simply an evening. After dessert, Brendan collected both their coat tickets at the check without being asked, and held Simone's coat for her in the same practical, unremarked way he did everything in his professional life. They walked out through the restored foyer together and into the cold. The November air hit with the authority it always brought to Ottawa by this time of year. 10 degrees, dropping the moment the door opened, breath-making clouds immediately, the canal dark and silent below the bridge though somehow present in the quality of the cold. The city was doing what it always did at this hour, which was to persist without reference to the evening's happening inside its buildings. On the front steps they stopped. "Thank you," Simone said. "You don't have to." "I know." She pulled her coat against the wind. "I'm doing it anyway." A pause. "Tomorrow there'll be a version of tonight that travels around the firm. I won't have any say in what shape it takes." "No," he agreed. "Neither will I." She looked at him. "Does that bother you?" He considered the canal, the ice, the particular weight of having made a decision he did not regret. "Less than the alternative would have," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, and the look she gave him then was different from all the careful, measuring looks of the evening. This one had no calculation left in it. It was quieter than any of the others and more direct, the look of someone who has stopped keeping track of what things cost. "Good night, Brendan," she said. "Good night, Simone." She walked to her car at the end of the row. He watched the taillights come on, the backup lights, the slow, careful arc into the street, and then the car was gone into the November dark and the city closed over the space it left. He stood on the steps for a moment, hands in his coat pockets, his breath making small, patient clouds in the cold. The hall behind him was still emptying, footsteps on stone, voices sorting themselves into goodbyes, the particular sound a room makes when it is returning to itself after people have finished using it. Then he turned up his collar and walked to his truck. There are rooms that decide, long before you arrive, who belongs in the warmth and who stands at the edges of it. The decision is not made by any one person or by any single moment. It happens in the accumulated small choices of many people, each one brief enough to deny, each one easy enough to excuse. A shoulder turned away, a gaze that finds somewhere else to go. A quiet daily choice not to be the person who walks over, made so quickly and so privately that the person making it never has to think of it as a choice at all. That choice costs nothing to the people making it. It costs everything to the person standing on the other side. It takes very little to make a different choice. A second glass picked up from a passing tray. A willingness to stand somewhere the room hasn't placed you. A decision, made in plain sight, not to participate in a cruelty that has dressed itself in politeness so thoroughly that the people performing it have long since stopped recognizing it as cruelty. That kind of choice will not fix the room. It will not undo what the room has been doing. But for the person who has been standing in the cold of it, who has been quietly counting the minutes since they arrived, measuring how much more of being unseen they can absorb before the evening becomes something they cannot recover from on the drive home. It is the difference between a night that confirms their worst fear and a night that doesn't. And sometimes that is enough. It is more than it sounds.